Hey, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and as you can see, I'm coming to you from a brand new space. This is my sewing studio in the new house, and although it's not fully set up yet, I do think it's coming together pretty nicely. Let me know what you think about it in the comments section below. Now this video tutorial will be a quilting one. I'm going to be using my 10-inch slicer ruler and teaching you how to make my fractured quilt block two different ways. You'll need the 10-inch slicer, and if you don't yet have this ruler, there's a link in the description box below for you where you can head over to CraftyGemini.com, our website, and make your purchase there. You'll also need some 10-inch by 10-inch cut squares of fabric. Whether you choose to buy a pre-cut and package bundle or you cut up your own from yardage, either way will work fine. Gather up your ruler, some fabric, and your basic quilting supplies, and let's get started. All right, so we are going to be using my 10-inch slicer ruler. This is a ruler I designed years ago. It's designed to be used with 10-inch by 10-inch pre-cut squares of fabric. You might have some of these in your stash if you're a quilter. If not, no worries. You can also just cut down yardage of fabric into 10-inch by 10-inch squares of fabric, and you can work with that also. That's fine. Oftentimes you can get these bundles on sale, and that way you know you're getting a good variety of different colors and prints, and usually the designer did the work for you, so you know that all the fabrics in the bundle are going to match. So it's kind of a quick and easy way to work with the 10-inch slicer ruler. Now, if you're not familiar with my ruler, I'm not going to go too into depth here, but you can do a quick search here on YouTube. If you type in Crafty Gemini 10-inch slicer, all the video tutorials on how to use the ruler will pop up. You don't buy any patterns with my rulers. Once you own the rulers, I create a free video library of archived ways that you can use it, and that's what this quilt along is. So I'm going to teach you how to make my fractured block this time. Here's the little guy. This is a 5-inch slicer, and this one is designed to be used with 5-inch by 5-inch squares. So I have them in both sizes, and you can pick them up. I'll include a link in the description box below. We sell them in our online shop at CraftyGemini.com. So the fractured block is this one, okay? I'm going to show you how to make it this way and also the mirror image version, because the way that I'm going to put this quilt top together features one of each. So you can see that if I were to join these two blocks here, they will match up, and then I'll do the opposite here to get this really cute kind of, almost like a bow tie kind of look to it, and we'll get into that in a minute. But if you don't like that block, there's a lot of other ways that you can use my 10-inch slicer ruler. Here's just an example. This is the easiest way that you can use it. This is called the sliced quilt, and I went ahead and hand quilted this one, but again, I have a video tutorial on how to make this quilt. I have a peak block, which is a really fun, quick and easy way, and this one I made up from yardage. I have a lot of blocks made up like this because I'm working on a baby quilt for a friend, but these all feature my 10-inch slicer ruler. All right, so to make the fractured block, you're going to want some squares of fabric. And for every two squares, two 10-inch squares that we match up, we're going to end up with two blocks. Okay, with very minimal waste, we'll trim them up at the end. Now, one quick note, if you're someone who's made quilts before and you own my 10-inch slicer and you've had it for years, there's something about this block that's slightly different to the other blocks that we've done in the past. If you've made them before, you know that you typically will end up with a more rectangular shaped block because we're cutting into a perfect square and then sewing up on the side seams, in this case of the peak block here. So we end up shrinking the pieces this way, but we still kept the full length this way. So I get a lot of times questions from people who are new to using my ruler asking, do I need to square them up and make them a perfect square? And my answer is always no. Why would you want to waste any fabric? Even though the block is rectangular, we're repeating the steps to create a ton of blocks. So they're all going to be consistent, the same size, the same height. These obviously have not been trimmed yet. Okay, but you can see these are the same blocks. They're all tall. They're all rectangular in shape, okay? I'm not going to trim them off just to make them a square. Instead, I will, when I piece them together, get a quilt that's longer than it is wider. And that's typically how we make quilts, right? That they're rectangular in shape to go over a long body, okay? So just keep that in mind. The block that we'll be working on, aren't these cute? I love these. Just a ton of different blues and geometric shapes. This is going to be a super cute baby quilt. Love it. I still have to make more of those peak blocks. But if you want to see the tutorial on how to make this block, I'll include the link below. Again, it's another block featuring my ruler. So for the fractured block, these actually get trimmed into squares. So if you're a quilter that loves to make quilt blocks that are square, this is going to give you kind of a whole nother level of design that you can play with when you make these blocks, because they're square. So that means I can put these two guys like this and match them here, or I can turn this one like this, or I can turn this one like this, right? And they're all still gonna match up because they're gonna measure about 9.5 inches tall and the same 9.5 inches wide. So you'll have a lot of design options. Now, I will be hosting a live video chat here on my YouTube channel later on this week where I will put up my design wall, lay out all these blocks, and we'll talk a lot about color value, lights and dark fabrics, and we'll play around with a few different layouts, design layouts for our quilt after we make all these blocks. All right, so let's make our first fractured block. So they show up better on this green mat. So this is my dark for me, this is my light. Now these two, if we're working on the first fractured block, it's going to be this way. Remember, I'm going to show you how to make two. One that's this way and one that's the mirror image. Okay, you see how it's like reflected across the center here? So we're working on this block first. We're going to want to cut into them with the pretty sides of the fabric facing up. Now, if you have a decent blade on your rotary cutter, you'll be able to cut these both stacked up face up this way. So I'm placing them each pretty side face up, one on top of the other. Line everything up as best as you can. And if you've worked with pre-cut squares before, you know that they're not always perfectly aligned. No worries, we'll trim things up. So we're gonna make two cuts. The first one, you're gonna orient the 10-inch slicer so that the text on here is upside down. So I want the narrow end lined up along the bottom. And then I want this left side edge lined up along the left. Okay? And then the top should be pretty much aligned there too. So you're aligning 1, 2, and 3 sides. And then I'm going to make this cut following this asymmetrical edge of the ruler. So there's my first cut. Now we need to make a cut this way. And to line up the ruler for that, I want you to flip the ruler face down, and then you're going to turn it. So you're looking at this corner that has a circled 1 and a circled 1. It's the only corner on the entire ruler that has a 1 and a 1, and that should be here. So then follow this edge along the cut edge of your fabric, and you're going to slide your ruler down until this bottom edge is aligned with the bottom edge of the fabric. So that's aligned there, that's aligned here, and then wherever this edge lands, go ahead and cut. All right, and those are the 3 pieces that we're going to cut out from each one of our 10-inch square pieces. Now, keep the ones that you cut pretty side of the fabric facing up separate from the next ones that we're going to cut. So basically, half of your quilt will be made up of blocks that were cut pretty side of the fabric face up, and the other half will be with blocks that were cut pretty side face down. So I'll show you how this is going to work. Because I lined these two up, and remember we picked a light and a dark fabric, all I'm going to do is take this bottom chunk here and swap out the pieces, like put one on top. Meaning, this mint color is gonna get sewn here and here, and it's gonna feature the dark fabric inside, right? The block that's underneath this is the one that was on top, and this is the one that's underneath. So you see how from 2 square pieces of fabric, we end up with 2 opposite kind of blocks, or at least they feature opposite fabrics in the different areas. Okay, and that's how we play a swapping game with most of all the blocks that I create with the 10-inch slicer. Okay, so all we did was swap out this bottom piece. Okay, and you're going to do that, decide how many blocks you want in your quilt, and then half of them are going to be cut pretty side face up, and the other half pretty side face down. So for now, I'm just going to stack these guys up, and I like to stack them in the order that they're going to be sewn. So let's put these aside. I'm going to grab 2 more blocks, again still following the light and dark rule. There's my dark, and let's do a gray. I'm going to give this a quick press because I see a few wrinkles in this fabric. All right, so I have my dark and my light. This time I'm going to cut into them pretty side of the fabric facing down. So again, I'm going to do them 2 layers. So I will still stack them, but flip them. Pretty side of the fabric should be down. Pretty side of the fabric should be down. Now, because we've already flipped the fabric face down, we don't need to swap around the orientation of the ruler. We can do it the exact same way that we did before, and we'll still get the mirror image chunks because the fabric has been flipped. So again, the narrow edge closest to me lined up on these 3 edges. Then I'm going to cut across, following the edge of the ruler. And then for the second cut, remember I flip and then turn so that one corner is towards the center area of the block. And then I align the left edge and the bottom edge of the ruler on these 2 edges of my fabric. And make that cut. And then if you flip these guys over, we get the same thing, it's just mirror imaged. So this bottom chunk, remember the bottom one that we're swapping out, which is kind of like that accent pop in the block, this one is the bigger of the 2. So this one is a little bit smaller. This is the one that I want to swap out because that one will get sewn to this color here. And this one is going to go here and sewn to these gray ones. All right? So now you would continue to do that for however many blocks you want to make in your quilt. You can use scrap fabrics, and I'm only doing this to keep things simple, featuring the 2 background fabrics the same with just 1 separate one. But if you had a ton of fabric scraps, cut your own 10-inch squares and you could feature 3 different fabrics here. You'd end up with a really easy and scrappy overall quilt design. So like I said, remember to keep these stacks separate if you are going to be featuring the mirror image versions and following along with how I'm making them. If you are a beginner and you have the 10-inch slicer and want to give this quilt along a go, I would recommend that you just choose one way. Maybe just keep all your squares pretty side face up and you can cut them all the same. That way all your blocks will be identical and it's kind of a more introductory level of quilting, and that way you're less likely to make mistakes when it comes to the piecing part of it. All right, so now to piece it, go ahead and grab some pins. And if we look at the components of each block that need to come together, this part here is just one solid piece, okay? So it's only going to get sewn along this diagonal type of edge. So these 2 are 2 pieces. So we need to sew these 2 together first to make a bigger piece that can then be sewn to the solid piece here. So very important, because otherwise, if you tried to sew this to here, you would have to stop. You don't have anything left to sew that there too. So always go with the smaller pieces that need to be combined and then sewn to a larger piece. So now to sew these up, I like to leave everything oriented the same way it's going to be once it's sewn and completed. So let's go ahead and take off this top layer so we can see what we're working with. And don't turn them or move them. There's so many edges here that are raw. I don't want you to flip things and mistakenly sew the wrong thing to the wrong piece of fabric. All right, so this is one block, this is another. I'm working on this one. This edge needs to be sewn here, from here and here. I'm going to flip it onto itself, pretty sides touching, and you're going to match up this raw edge and this raw edge. So everything should come to a point right here. And I'm just going to put a pin on this side because this is the only side I need to sew right now. I'll do the same thing to these 2. And I would just go through and do this to all my squares, all the patchwork pieces that need to be made up, and keep them in the same orientation. So this, I know the side that has the pin is where I will be sewing. These can stand aside for now. Let's do the same thing to these guys. Again, move this aside. This needs to get sewn along here. So I'm going to pick up these 2 pieces. Line everything up and put my pin on this side. All right, now let's head over to the sewing machine. We're going to set our seam allowance to 1/4 inch, and we're going to stitch on all the edges that have a pin. All right, and I know that even if I move things around, I won't sew the wrong edge because only the side that has a pin on it is the side that I should be sewing on. So my 1/4 inch. I'm using a stitch length of about 2 to 2.5 millimeters is good. And you can do this all assembly line style, so just keep feeding it through and chain piecing everything together. Now these edges are not cut on a true diagonal, but you don't want to be tugging or pulling because it is kind of a slight bias edge and you don't want to distort your fabric, okay? So just let the machine do the work of pulling it through with the feed dogs. All right, let's take these over to the ironing board next. All right, so I'll take my snips and separate each one. Then I like to press just as it was sewn to help set the stitches. And then I'm going to open it and just press to the dark fabric if you want to. This block only has 2 seams, so there's not a lot of bulk being built up. And repeat that to all your pieces. All right, so here are 2 of this color combo and 2 of this color combo that we've pieced together. Now let's line them up with the corresponding background piece so that we know what we need to do. Now remember, the accent pop in each block is the bigger of the 2 pieces that were pieced together. So if we look at this one and this is the bigger one. So I know that the other piece that needs to be sewn here is the background chunk that matches the smaller piece, okay? So that needs to be sewn there. This one needs to be sewn here. All right, so you see how we've used 2 10-inch squares, one of the mint color and one of this coral color, and by just cutting 2 cuts into it and sewing them back together, we get 2 identical blocks that I think look a lot better than just a 10-inch square piece of fabric. So that's what the 10-inch slicer ruler is all about. So these are gonna get sewn. And I'll grab my pins in a minute, but let me just show you how we line up the other one. Do the same thing here. This has the bigger chunk of the 2, okay? So that's the accent piece, meaning the remaining chunk needs to be the background piece that matches the smaller one. And then this one goes here. All right, so that's gonna give me 4 blocks. Now to piece them together, you'll see that because we've sewn and we've eaten up a 1/4 inch seam allowance at these 2 fabric chunks here, this edge is shorter than this edge. No worries, you will trim it up. There's very minimal waste. So just flip it so that they're pretty sides touching. Again, do not stretch or distort your fabric and just center it along that edge. Okay, you should basically have a little bit of overhang here and a little bit of overhang here. I'll grab a pin or 2, and again, pin right along the edge that you need to sew. That way, as you're working with these stacks and you move them aside, you don't sew the wrong edges by mistake. So that's 1. Same thing here. And don't stretch this edge either because you will distort your fabric. All right, now let's take them back to the sewing machine, same 1/4 inch seam allowance, and stitch these 4 blocks up. Now let's head to the ironing board. All right, now that we have these 4 blocks that we've been working on, let's go ahead and trim them up. As you can see, the bigger background piece extends past on both sides. So we need to trim that up and make sure that everything is 9.5 inches square. Now my 10-inch slicer does have a right angle corner that you could use, and say you were to measure using, the grid on your cutting mat, that you wanted to line things up and align things to use that straight edge to trim up. But it would take you a little bit longer, but that's totally doable too if, say, this is the only ruler that you have. If you have other rulers, and you're a quilter, so you probably have a bunch if you are, a 9.5 inch square ruler comes in really handy here because we can just place it right on top and clean up any of the outer edges. So we're going to trim all of these down to 9.5 inches square. Now, when I trim it up, the accent chunk in the fractured block, I want you to keep all of this as much as possible, because if you are going to be doing it, and I'll show you mirror image, like this and like this, if you trim away too much from here, you might not do the exact same thing on the other one, and then you'll end up with a little moving, kind of a slippage here where the seams might not match perfectly. So the key is be consistent in your trimming. And if your blocks are a lot bigger, just trim away from the background fabric versus the little accent chunk. So I'm going to line this up down here. And it looks like I just have to trim a little bit off of some of these sides. Here, here, here. I could probably stand to take off a little here. Okay? And that's it. I'm going to do that to all my blocks. No matter if they're face up, no matter if they were cut face up or face down, it doesn't matter. Still keep all that you can of that fractured chunk. 9.5 puts me right here. All right, so I've trimmed up 4 blocks, and you can see this is all we have as far as waist goes from those 4 blocks. So this 10-inch slicer ruler is a great way to use up pre-cut 10-inch squares if you have them. Go ahead and work on your blocks, and then meet me back here. Make sure that you hit the subscribe button so you can be notified. There's a little bell icon next to the subscribe button on my YouTube channel here, and that will notify you when I'm live, so that we can talk a little bit more about design and block placement, and I'll show you what I have in mind with these mirror image blocks. So you can go ahead, watch the video tutorial again. You can make all your blocks just in one direction or the other, or do what I'm doing, half and half, so that some are mirror imaged, and we'll be creating this really cool design layout featuring my fractured block. Remember that if you need to get your hands on the 10-inch slicer ruler, or even the smaller one, the 5-inch slicer, I've included a link for you in the description box below. Just click there. We sell them in our online shop at craftygemini.com/shop, and they're all made in the USA, and I have a full video library on ways that you can use both of these rulers. And that's it. That's how you make the fractured block 2 different ways using my 10-inch slicer ruler. I hope you all enjoyed this video tutorial and that you'll follow along with us. Post your pictures on the internet. Make sure you use the hashtags CraftyGemini and 10-inch slicer so that I can check out the fabrics that you chose and which blocks you've chosen to make using my 10-inch slicer ruler. Thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to click the subscribe button with the little bell icon so you don't miss out on notifications of all my future video tutorials. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.